You were in that courtroom today. Of everything you heard, everything that you saw inside and outside, what was your wow? What stuck out to you?
How badly the day went for Trump, actually. I think his lawyers struggled in the opening statements. And it was really notable because the state put on a very convincing opening statement. And I think in particular what Todd Blanche ran into was the problem that he couldn't say what his client wanted him to say, that, you know, the feds didn't charge this case. And so he was left having to say things like, you know, this is President Trump. He's earned his title. We should all refer to him as President Trump. There was stuff about how, you know, he...
Who cares, right? This is a criminal trial, and the argument he's making is how you refer to Trump, what we call him by name. That was his big moment?
He led off with that, and I think that was striking. And I think everyone in the courthouse kind of looked around and thought, is he really going with this argument? He eventually segued into saying that Trump was ignorant of all of this and he couldn't be held accountable because this was all Michael Cohen's doing and he never signed off on the checks. And the one argument that Todd Blanche didn't make, which I've heard the Trump legal team discuss in previous days, was this idea about how voters weren't deprived of any information before the 2016 election because they wouldn't have been privy to the Trump organization's records in the first place. But none of that came up. It was all an opening statement for an audience of one, which was Trump.
Neil, you have been following every step of this since day one. What was your takeaway?
Very similar to Hugo. So, I mean, I think the Trump opening statement just felt really flat. I mean, there were three arguments that the opening statement made. One is it wasn't Trump's idea. Basically, it was Michael Cohen's idea to do all of this. And I'm sorry, Michael Cohen took out a home equity loan of thousands upon thousands of dollars on his home in order to pay off Stormy Daniels. No lawyer does that. Zero. The idea that he would have done it on his own, just out of the goodness of his own heart or something, thoroughly implausible. Second, you put on the screen before Todd Blanche, Trump's lawyer's statement that I have a spoiler alert. There's nothing wrong with trying to influence an election. It's called a democracy. That is just legally a totally bogus argument because influencing an election is sometimes legal and sometimes illegal. It depends on how you do it. If you bribe someone to vote for you, that's illegal, even though it's influencing the election. Here, Trump is accused of trying to hide the gifts, essentially, to him and avoid the transparency that our campaign finance laws require. That's a crime every day of the week. Third, he says, well, Blanche says these payments are for purely legal expenses, legitimate legal expenses. And that, I think, is going to be a problem that we're going to hear a lot about over the next month, Stephanie, as the trial goes forward. Because as an attorney, the last thing you want to do is overpromise in your opening statement and tell the jury the evidence is going to show something, and then it doesn't actually turn out to show it. That's when you blow your credibility. Harry Litman made this point, our colleague, earlier today. Who's the witness who's going to testify that these payments were for legitimate legal expenses? It's just unthinkable. So I think a really poor way to start, which is why Trump has always been scared of not just the other trials, but this trial in particular.
David, what do you think?
I'm struck by how this trial has given us something that I didn't think we would ever see, which was, you know, Trump doesn't use email. He doesn't create a paper trail that shows you what he's thinking or what he did. Instead, he makes decisions in a room with a small number of loyalists, a lot of family members, and a few people who've been with him forever. And that's why it was always sort of a hard nut to crack to try to get to explain Trump's motivations in a court of law or in a newspaper story. You had to get one of those few circle of people, few people in that circle who are with him. Now they have that. Michael Cohen, one of these people who've been with Trump forever, through a series of moves Trump made while he was president, as it alienated Michael Cohen, turned him into a witness for the prosecution. So we're going to hear in a courtroom somebody say, yeah, there were three people in the room with Trump, but I was one of them. And with David Pecker, maybe we were two of them. So we're going to have a sort of an instance I didn't think we would see for many years, that kind of person turning on Trump.
Then when the defense has their witnesses, who is Donald Trump going to have? Because this family man who supposedly, according to Donald Trump's team, was really just protecting his family, none of his family members showed up in court to be with him. It was Lawrence O'Donnell earlier who said even Jeffrey Dahmer, his mom and dad, they came to court every day of his trial. So if David, the only people who were ever in Trump's inner circle or the likes of a Michael Cohen or a David Pecker? What about his family? They're not in court. Are they going to be defense witnesses?
I don't think they are. I don't think Donald Trump Jr. might have been involved a little bit in this transaction as it was sort of entered into the Trump Organization's books and covered up. But I don't think they were really privy to this. And I don't see them calling those folks to make a case affirmatively that this was something good. I think what they're going to rely on is the Trump team is going to rely on the idea that, there's a bunch of dots here, but we don't know enough to connect them. We don't know enough to say this was Trump's intent, which you really need as a non-lawyer. I think you need to prove this case.
Neil, do you think it makes a difference? Do you think the jury notices that Donald Trump is a man standing alone? We see other defendants show up with all sorts of family members and support to try to gain sympathy with the jury. Will it impact the jury in any way that nobody has shown up for Trump as of yet?
I'm not sure that the people in the spectator stands is going to make a huge difference, but I think a closely related point, Stephanie, will, which is basically the witnesses against Trump, like people like Pecker, people like Michael Cohen, these are all the people Trump hired or paid. They're all his Confederates. And yes, Trump's strategy is, Michael Cohen has no credibility. He lied to a court. But he's Trump's criminal. He's the guy that Trump brought in to start all of this in the first place. And so I do think that the jury at the end of the day is going to be left with, God, every person that seems to surround Donald Trump is a criminal or a liar or a scoundrel or all of the above. And in a way that's going to rub off on Donald Trump. And so I think that dynamic is definitely going to be at play here. And remember, there's a lot of charges here. There's 34 different counts. I mean, that's a big indictment. 34 is so huge. I mean, the super long double album by Taylor Swift from last Friday only has 31 tracks. It's an amazing record, by the way. But I mean, that just shows you this is a lot going on in this criminal trial. And today we started to see the prosecution lay out those first three key elements that Trump paid off the doorman. He paid off one National Enquirer story, and now he's paying off another one, the Stormy Daniels.
All right, let's talk about David Pecker, right? Former publisher, owner of the National Enquirer and a number of other magazines through American media. He has known and been entangled with Donald Trump for decades, right? David Pecker is the king of New York tabloids, and nobody loves to be splashed across those tabloids or have bad stories about him hidden more than Donald Trump. The fact that Pecker is the first witness for the prosecution, what did he tell the jury today? And has Trump said, I mean, we know Trump obviously goes bad on Michael Cohen every day and yesterday. What's he said about David Pecker? They have been friends and allies for decades.
Yeah, Pecker as the first witness was really interesting because at trial you start with your most important witness and you end with your strongest witness typically. And I think this gave us a flavor of where this case is going to go. And I think it was very telling in the opening statement from the prosecution that they wanted to make this link directly to the election. The whole stand-up, the whole groundwork leading up to Pecker was Trump entered into this catch and kill scheme to benefit the campaign. It was all to benefit the campaign. It was to get positive coverage. It was to attack political opponents. And it was for Pecker to be the eyes and ears of the campaign for negative stories that could be coming down the pike. And this is clearly where it's going. Pecker on the stand was being asked about how he operated and how he orchestrated the catch and kill schemes, how over $10,000 that individual editors had to come and, ask him if they could spend that kind of money on sources and trying to get stories. And Pecker will narrate the entirety of the relationship between Trump and him, AMI, and National Enquirer, and I think that's what makes him such an important witness.
Or the prosecution is hoping he will be that narrator, Neil.
Absolutely. I think that's the I think aim of the prosecution. It's also, by the way, just chronologically, you start with Pecker because Pecker's the guy who's negotiating early with Trump, even well before he's president, to adopt this catch and kill strategy, or checkbook journalism is how it was referred to today. And look, everyone would love to have newspapers in catch and kill situations. If you're a candidate or any kind of high official or, corporate CEO, whatever, if Biden would love to, I'm sure, have someone who's going out and buying every story about his son and making it so none of them could be published, because that's what Pecker did here. And I think we're going to see more from Pecker. He just testified for a nanosecond today because one of the jurors had a emergency dental problem. So it's the next day or two that we're really going to see that testimony come out.
Turn up the volume for this one. Tomorrow, the Senate will begin taking up that long-awaited package for Ukraine. But infighting among House Republicans may have only just begun. House Speaker Mike Johnson earned praise from moderates for pushing ahead on the multi-billion-dollar bill. But far-right members like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who you saw right there, are enraged over his decision to work with Democrats and is now vowing to oust him yet again if he does not resign. Back with us tonight to discuss, MSNBC political analyst Juanita Tolliver and Republican strategist Stuart Stevens. He is now with the Lincoln Project. His new book, The Conspiracy to End America, 5 Ways My Old Party is Driving Our Democracy to Autocracy, is out now. Stuart, I want to start with the Wall Street Journal Ed Board and the headline they wrote, quote, Mr. Johnson's behavior is called leadership, and the GOP would be more popular and better able to govern if more of its members showed such mettle themselves or had more respect for those who demonstrate it. I'm going to take a wild guess here. You're down with that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think 2 things are true. Mike Johnson deserves credit, a lot of credit, for really making a historic decision that was the first time in a long time that you saw members of a European citizenship going forward and saying, God bless America, which happened after this vote. But the other hand, I think it's important not to overpraise him because there's sort of a dumbing down here of what it means to be a Speaker of the House. What he did, he didn't vote the way that Vladimir Putin wanted him to vote. And I think that's a pretty low bar for leadership. And we still have this reality that the majority of Republicans voted the way that Vladimir Putin wanted them to vote. And I think that just shows how the party has collapsed. Thank God this thing passed. It should have passed months ago. A lot of lives would have been saved. There'd be a lot of innocent women and children and soldiers that would be alive today. But it could have failed, and it didn't, and there's some credit to that.
Juanita, what do you think?
Yeah, I give Mike Johnson no credit. So I'm going to latch on to the part that Stuart mentioned about the fact that this should have passed 6 months ago. And I appreciate that President Volodymyr Zelensky mentioned to Kristen Welker on Meet the Press that this is aid that is meant to help protect and fight for freedom, protect and fight for democracy, which helps globally, not just Ukraine. And so I think that this is long overdue. I also think that it's exclusively motivated by Mark Johnson's intention to cover himself with protection from Democrats. I said weeks ago, Stephanie, that Democrats should not offer to save Republicans for themselves or save Mike Johnson from himself unless they get something in exchange. And I think that this foreign aid package, as well as the sequencing on how it was voted, is a first step in that process. And I think Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries fully understands how to operate with this minority and hold that over Mike Johnson's head.
Well, here's what I really want to know, Stuart. Mike Johnson telling far-right extremists no, does that mean it is the beginning of the end for him or the beginning of the end for them?
Well, I had kind of a going out of business sale for any optimism with the Republican Party. So I'd hate to be one to think that they might be able to rise to a higher level. I suspect that 2 months from now, Mike Johnson will be Speaker of the House. You have to realize, and look back, they were basically down to putting an ad in Craigslist to find a speaker. And to go through that again, I think would be so painful for this party and the members of the party who are trying to focus on their reelection now, that I don't think they'll do it. Marjorie Taylor Greene is somebody who, nobody likes, and people think that she's just this kind of odd, angry person. She's not someone that people are drawn to. So I think that he'll still be Speaker. I think he'll stay.
Juanita, I want to go back to the last thing you said, because some Democrats have signaled they're willing to save Johnson if this motion to vacate moves forward. But others are telling Axios that they're not going to let him off so easy. What do you think is going to happen here?
I think there could be an opportunity for Democrats to get additional long overdue legislation to formally get votes on the House floor. As we know, this motion to vacate is dangling. Of course, I agree with Stuart that Marjorie Taylor Greene is huffing and puffing with no real action, no timeline, no clear next steps or support based on the fractures that are visible within the Republican Party. But I do know that Hakeem Jeffries knows how to negotiate, even with the staging of how these votes rolled out over the weekend, with Democrats hanging back while Republicans looked chaotic, while 112 Republicans voted the way Putin wanted them to. And so I think that's something that Democrats are going to continue to leverage. They are not going to come to the immediate aid of Republicans and Mike Johnson, but what they will do is negotiate for other legislation. And then when the vote comes, they will show up before that clock runs out.
Hey everyone, MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.